projects that this presentation will include an overview of. So, Peter, the stage is yours. Can you unmute your microphone, Peter? We can't hear you for the time being. You're still muted.
Sorry.
Yeah, there you go.
I just changed my screen because it didn't work in instance. Okay, so thank you. My name is Peter Lampert, and I work at the University of Vienna. And we started a research group focusing on plant reproduction. Since some people from chemistry or physics are here, I first say what is plant reproduction. So you can see here a bee visiting a flower, and if this bee carries pollen on its body, the pollen carries the male sperm cells, and after the visit, fertilization can occur. So, and only after this process, it's possible for the plant to build fruits and seeds. And so we've got the processes of pollination, which is important for the presentation, and then the seed dispersal, which will take place afterwards after a successful pollination. Sorry. The presentation structure as follows. And why is teaching botanical contents a challenge? First, we know from studies that students have little interest in botanical topics, unfortunately, and they also don't know much about wild plants. And teachers, on the other hand, spend less time on teaching botanical contents. And the information contained in textbooks, as we know from studies, contains little information about plants and adaptations. So it mostly focuses on terms which are not that interesting to students. And all these features can be seen as aspects of plant blindness, that people don't see plants and their importance, and they can reinforce each other. So if the teacher is not interested and doesn't spend time, students get less interested, and so on. So why did I decided to investigate this topic? It's a very important biological topic because plants make up almost every ecosystem, as was mentioned before. They're very important, and this topic connects various fields of biology. So there are animals involved, plants are involved. It has a lot to do with current environmental problems. Just to mention the issue of insect decline, that insects are declining, so there's not that many pollinators around, which also affects our nutrition, because many fruits and seeds we eat are pollinated by animals. So it's a really interesting topic. And there was little research in this field, which was good for me to explore this field from a scientific perspective. Students have difficulties to connect flowers with plant reproduction. That means that students don't know that flowers are the first step of building fruits, and then for seed dispersal in the later part. And they don't see these cyclic aspects of the process, that seeds are built, then a new plant grows, which has flowers get pollinated, and then seed develop again. And especially young children think that humans are necessary for plant reproduction, so that humans need to bring out the plants, plant them, and harvest them, so they don't know that it can also occur in nature. How we understand learning in this presentation is a constructivistic approach of learning, so that learning happens individually, and students change or reconstruct their conceptions based on existing conceptions. And this presentation is part of a bigger part of our research group. So we use the model of educational reconstruction. I think you're familiar with it. And it has certain aspects like the analysis of science content, which you see on the left part. So we analyzed scientific books on the topic, but we also analyzed students' conceptions about plant reproduction, and we tried different approaches how to teach it. So, like one example is here, like the flower models, where students can play insects and where they can try to see how pollinators act. And yeah, so we explored a lot, and we also analyzed biology textbooks, not only because they are commonly used in Austria, but we also wanted to find out where do students' conceptions come from. These were the research questions of this study. So we analyzed which contents are included in the school books and which examples are used. And we also analyzed how these sections were structured, and we compared it to the other results from the other studies where we analyzed students' conceptions and the scientific backgrounds. Our sampling contained only books from the 5th grade because the curriculum refers to plants in this grade, but it doesn't mention plant reproduction explicitly. But in all school books, this topic was included at this age. And we then used the concept map to analyze all these books. And we answered some additional questions about metaphors used in these books and how the general structure was in all books. So how does this map look like? It looks a bit complicated. You don't have to get everything from it. So we just had this map, and then we marked everything we saw in the chapters. And then we deleted everything which was not present. And so we had a good overview on each book, which was then transferred into a table for further comparisons. And so this made an easy analysis possible. So I'm going to show you the results from these 6 areas. First, the general structure of the chapter. So the books had quite long chapters on plant reproduction, which is good news that they have so much space in these books. And it was always connected to other topics connected with plants, maybe also due to the curriculum, which doesn't refer explicitly to plant reproduction. Most books had a chronological order of the process, and what was also surprising, that also asexual reproduction was contained in the books. However, sexual reproduction, as we mentioned before in the pollination, where male sperm cells and the female egg cell fertilize, is important because sexual reproduction is important to have a good variation because the genes can mix then. However, the importance of this sexual recombination was stated in only one book, even though they explain all the process around it, but the main importance was excluded. Then the flower structure was shown in all books, and it was shown in very much detail in the books. And the examples used are most often cherries because they provide an easy flower, and it also relates to students' daily lives. So that's was used most often, or abstracted images of flowers. And in general, you could say that the use of terms was appropriate and consistent throughout the books. So there were only minor differences. In the context of pollination, most books refer to pollination via animals, like we had before with the bee, but also with wind. So people who are allergic to pollen maybe know what I'm talking about, that wind transfers huge amounts of pollen from some species. And so these 2 vectors were mentioned in almost every book. However, the advantages of these ways of pollination were only mentioned in few books, and only one book mentions explicitly what is the advantage if animals pollinate, what is the advantage when the wind is the pollinator. Then some plants can self-pollinate, which is sometimes has negative effects because of the seeds don't develop that properly, and it has some negative aspects. But for some plants, it also advantages because they can reproduce without having another plant, which is necessary. However, books always mention it in a negative context. Plants are used the same throughout the chapters usually, and which is interesting is can be seen on the figure. The examples or most of the time insects in general, or honeybees or bumblebees. And all the other examples, although there are a lot of different animals, so there are beetles involved or flies involved, they don't occur that often in books. So most books only focus on few animal examples in the context of pollination. So it is the transfer of pollen to another flower. Then before seeds can develop, there's a process called pollen tube growth. So the pollen lands on a flower and then it grows to a pollen tube which can be 1 or 2 centimeters long, which then enables fertilization in the later context, and then seeds can develop. So this is a complex process which is quite fascinating because this cell is the fastest growing plant cell, which grows more than 1 centimeter per hour, so which is quite fast, at least for plants. And the books describe it in much detail. And they also show the relation between flowers and fruits, some books at least. Now the dispersal of fruits and seeds, which happens after these processes, was shown also in many books, and they also classified these different fruits if it's transferred by wind or if it's transferred by animals. And so they showed quite a good variation of examples, both in the plants section and also in the animals section. So, and the synonyms used, some books used synonyms and metaphors which are not that advantageous, which I will discuss later on, such as transport metaphors, because transport implies some kind of that they want to do it, and it's not a side effect, but they want to transport something from A to B. Yeah. And some other words are due to the German language which are not that good because they might lead to confusions in students' conceptions. Now to the discussion, first part. It's good that the books connect to other topics such as useful plants, because we know from literature that students are more interested in useful plants when they're interested in plants. And it's important that the complete process was presented in a chronological order, because we saw in the beginning that students have difficulties in connecting these processes in the right order. However, the importance of sexual recombination should be highlighted more in the books, and oversimplification should be avoided. But this is just like minor aspects because they used it most of the time consistently. Which is important is to highlight advantages and disadvantages of pollination by wind or animals, or even advantages of self-pollination, that students understand why these processes have involved, why these differences, how they can be explained. And therefore it's necessary to discuss what are the differences between different flowers, but also between different animals. But the books don't show that many different animals as pollinators, so it's hard to discuss it if they're not included in the books. And another aspect are that this pollen tube growth I explained before, this process is quite fascinating and it's included in all books, but we can't find it in students' conceptions. So definitely there's a need to improve teaching about this phenomenon, because it's fascinating, it's important, but we cannot find it in students' conceptions. So we aim to design animations and experiments to illustrate pollen tube growth even better, because there are, especially in German, not that many good materials available at the moment. And what is also important is then we have the connections from pollination to pollen tube growth and then seed dispersal, seed growth and seed dispersal, highlighted even better, because we see that students mix these processes, and this is a problem because then they don't understand how this cycle works, and when they always mix these two processes, they get conceptions where they even don't know that that they have two different conceptions. So they mix it in a way that they don't know that they mix it. And what's also important, what I discussed before, is that we should avoid metaphors which suggest a deliberate transfer of pollen, that animals want to help the flowers, or that it's necessary for them to do this. So some metaphors should be avoided. To teach botanical contents, it's not only important to use school books in an appropriate way, we have to combine it with other results from studies, that we have to use real plants at school or for outside activities to show all the aspects of this topic, and to show also the broad variety in this topic. And a final conclusion, the quality textbooks was very good and was suitable for this grade. However, some terms need to be discussed critically. So, for instance, these transport metaphors I said before, and we have to relate it to students' conceptions we know from literature, and we have to highlight the diversity of organisms involved. If I only write about the honeybee or insects in general, how shall students then understand how this complexity of interactions evolved during time? We have so many animals, from butterflies, thousands of species of wild bees, and they all are different, and they all have different effects on the flower. So it will be important to show this diversity of animals and also of the flowers to understand the fascination of this topic. And the importance of sexual reproduction should also be highlighted, because then they know why these processes are that important. And another idea is to connect it to other topics. For instance, the insect decline, which is a current problem we are facing, which also affects our daily diet, because many things we eat every day are connected to pollination by insects. And so this is a huge issue. And so it could also be possible to address this topic in other subjects as well, to highlight how important are plants and how important is plant reproduction. So that's my presentation. Thank you for listening. Here's like the books we've analyzed and the literature. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Really interesting topic. Makes you sometimes realize how many misconceptions you may be holding yourself on things like, outside you're actually specialist, like pollination here, which is definitely outside, if you like, my sort of what is here. So thank you so much. Any questions from the audience here? Are there any questions?
Are you going to be writing a textbook, maybe?
Well, I was asked to write a textbook, but so far I haven't had time to write one. But we work on many materials to teach it better. So yeah, we're working on it.
That's great.
If there are no any other comments or questions from the audience, just a very, if you like, quick one from me, Peter, with regards actually to the applicability, perhaps the generalizability actually of the findings to other contexts, perhaps other countries here.
Mm-hmm. So I think maybe the diversity of animals and plants and this co-evolutionary process which are happening should probably be discussed in other countries as well, because the one study I cited in the beginning, they also show that the plant chapters are most often focusing on what is this part of the plant, how is this part called, and not that much about the interactions and the phenomena occurring. So this could be highlighted probably also in other countries, and maybe also analyzed in textbooks how it's shown in other countries as well.
Good, excellent, thank you. Any other comments before we perhaps draw these to a conclusion here? No questions. Thank you everyone for attending. Thanks to all of our presenters today. I hope you enjoyed actually the session, and as I wish you actually perhaps that we can meet next year in Florence in person rather than via online sort of ways. So thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure of meeting you actually all, and a great pleasure of hearing of the presenters' work. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.